FinTech Chatter, brought to you by Tier 1 People, leaders in FinTech executive search. Hello and welcome to FinTech Chatter, the show where I connect with FinTech leaders for a bit of a chat. I'm your host, Dexter Cousins, and today I'm joined by Dr. Dimitrios Salampasis. Dimitrios is Senior Lecturer of FinTech Innovation at Swinburne University. He's a visiting Professor of FinTech at the University of Québec, a Blockchain and FinTech Fellow at the Singapore University of Social Sciences, a visiting faculty at the School Management of Fribourg, Switzerland, and an academic council member of the Global FinTech Institute. I couldn't think of anybody better to talk about FinTech innovation. Dimitrios, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's very good to have you, my friend. We've talked about doing this for quite a while, I think almost a year now. And the opportunity presented itself really through a lot of talk that I'm hearing through my network, which has been this question of whether FinTech innovation has gone backwards, stalled, or progressed over this last 12 months. And I couldn't think, particularly with that intro that I did, of anybody more qualified to talk about FinTech innovation in my network than yourself. So before we have that chat, maybe I did a brief intro, but you want to tell our listeners a bit about who you are?
Thank you so much. So basically, as you mentioned, I work for Swinburne University, where I lead the FinTech capability. I'm the course director for the Masters of Financial Technologies, and also I'm a senior lecturer of FinTech innovation and entrepreneurship, which means I teach, I do research, I do industry engagement. I've got global projects. I talk with all the stakeholders within the FinTech ecosystem. And basically, I'm trying to be as embedded within the broader FinTech space in Australia and overseas, but also have the research, scholarship, and thought leadership in relation to entrepreneurship, innovation, emerging technologies and strategies, with a particular lens in financial services and FinTech.
So I'm going to kind of reference a little poll that I did on LinkedIn. Now, I'm not saying this is by any means qualitative or quantitative research, but I did ask that question to my network around whether they felt FinTech innovation over the last 12 months had either stagnated, had gone backwards, or had progressed. Now, only 25% felt it had progressed. The others felt it had, 75% had either stagnated or gone backwards. The vast majority, I think, probably around about 45% had actually felt that it stagnated. What's your kind of sense as to what you're seeing, Dimitrios? And is there any kind of evidence to back up what people are sensing?
That's a really good question. And I would like to take a step back here in terms of thinking about what FinTech innovation actually means. I don't really think that the innovation per se has actually stagnated. I think the challenge is the fact that the business models that we try to see and the ventures that we try to see and we see around doing stuff around FinTech, these are the ones who become more problematic. And I'm sure we're going to talk about also the reduced VC funding and, the global pressure and all these kind of things. I think based on what I have seen globally, there is a bit of an innovation theater around the fact that we see lots of FinTech startups assuming or pretending they do things, but at the end of the day, they don't do anything. So it's more around creating a bit of a buzz or a bit of a noise. And that definitely helps with the hype of social media and the digital space that we live in. I definitely see we have seen a very interesting developments, especially in the payment space, which still remains at the forefront of innovation globally. We see a couple of things happening in the wealth tech space, in the banking space, even though neobanks, challenger banks have been receiving a lot of pressure currently. Overall, I think, Dexter, when we try to conceptualize FinTech innovation, I think we need to be very careful around not the idea perspective or the business model, but more around who is behind this in terms of the ventures that actually try to operationalize these business models. I think this is where the problem lies, and not to the fact that there are not many ideas out there or there are not many, innovations taking place.
Yeah. So one of my network kind of did ask me an even more specific question, which was, did I feel that there was more innovation in the earlier days of fintech, specifically, kind of 2016, 2017. It felt at the time that it did, but I also reflect back then and there was so much low hanging fruit. Do you think there's a case also that maybe, we're reaching the point where that low hanging fruit has all gone, and now it's like it has to be, if it's an innovation, it absolutely has to move the needle, and that needle's gone kind of further?
Look, absolutely. I totally agree with you. I think when we look back at 2015, 2016, and if we put it simply, there was a lot out there, especially because regulation wasn't there. Yeah. Because also the institutional players weren't paying much attention. If we go back into the narratives, or the too small to care, or the too big to fail, which is not the case any longer. And basically the narrative at that point was direct competition, clash, and, let's go and disrupt the financial services space, which, as you probably have realized, it hasn't really happened. I think what is going on at the moment, we see more consolidation. I think we see more collaboration and strategic partnerships between fintechs, big techs, and incumbents. As I said, there is definitely strategic innovation happening across many areas, but I really believe innovation needs to be very much aligned to the actual needs of the society. There has to be an actual support of what consumers want, and not, having this kind of inflated multiple offerings that basically what they do, they try to replicate one another, which if you see lots of business models, you don't really see what the differentiation standpoint is, which end up basically confusing the consumer rather than solving real pains. Yeah. So, and of course, you see multiple confusing value propositions, which are not strong enough. They don't support or address customer stickiness. And also in times of risk and, in times of global uncertainty, consumers would go where? To the ones that basically trust. Yeah. So the trust issue is a big one that, in my opinion, it hasn't yet been properly addressed to a greater extent from different fintechs.
Yeah. I remember having Anthony Thompson on the show a couple of years back, and on that issue of trust, he said, the research he'd done showed that there was kind of two types of trust when it came to banks. The first trust was, do I trust that if my salary gets paid into the bank, that I can take the money out at an ATM or it's going to be there? Yes. Do I trust that the bank has my best interests at heart and is going to give me the best interest deal on my home loan? No. And so it's interesting that, we seem to be at the beginning of potentially another banking crisis. And that question of trust around, do I trust that my money will be there, is now being questioned. Do you think this is now an opportunity for fintech and, more, and I put within fintech, I think blockchain and digital assets. Do you see that now as this kind of juncture that we're at as being potentially another opportunity? A bit like what we had micro here in Australia, the Royal Commission kind of acted as a catalyst for, the kind of digital bank craze that we see in 2018.
What I definitely see is the need for further integration and collaboration. I think in these times, incumbents cannot themselves only be able to cater for the needs of the consumers. But at the same time, I don't think fintechs standing alone will be able to compete to that respect either. So I think we need both. Definitely, there are some business models out there which can be way more resilient. But in principle, I think we're going in times where trust will depend on strategic partnerships and collaborations. So I don't think at the moment that going against the big players, going against the incumbents is the right move. And we have seen that. And let's not forget that we have another player, which is the big techs, which their role is still quite obscure at the moment. I'm sure you have seen the latest announcements of Apple, of all these big ones who are entering the field very fiercely because they've got the capabilities and the capacity to do so. And that's, again, another question mark when it comes to regulation. So I think we're going to go into a space where we're going to see strategic partnerships, which I really prefer rather than having acquisitions and mergers. So in order to regain that consumer trust, we definitely need both interfaces. So if I would make a prediction, that's what I would see coming.
Yeah. Now, talking about the kind of mergers and acquisitions part, I think another question that's been asked really around, the innovation and this kind of, whether it's lagging has been the funding landscape. And there's been a massive drop off in funding over the last 12 months. However, if you kind of look at the data, where we're at now is exactly where we were pre-COVID. So I think towards the end of 2019. Do you think that the drop off in funding has caused a kind of pullback in innovation, or could that pullback in funding potentially create an increase in innovation?
I do believe that money is still out there. I just believe that funders are becoming way more selective, and if I can use that word, also impatient, looking both for yield and also scalability. Yeah. So basically, I think what's happening is that they will only start funding and giving opportunities to business models which can show ability to scale, which can show ability to become resilient, and which really have unique value propositions. And I'm really highlighting the word unique with the fact that, yes, there is still innovation out there, but that innovation needs to be meaningful, needs to be responsible, and it really needs to cater for the actual needs and not the inflated needs of consumers. And also, I think they've also realized that, and personally, I believe this has caused a massive issue when it comes to all these obscene and crazy valuations, all this hype across numerous ventures. And also, we see that valuations probably are not credible indicator for growth any longer. And of course, let's not forget the growing regulatory pressure, which actually is going to encourage innovation. And I really hope that this is the case, but at the same time, in a more responsible and not disruptive manner. Let's not forget financial services is a highly regulated industry. If that's good or bad, that's a different conversation. But I do believe that funders are going to be way more selective, and also they're going to pay a lot more attention of who is behind. So the team, the culture, the skills are going to play a massive differentiation standpoint when it comes to the decision to fund different ventures.
Interesting you mentioned that, because just if I think anecdotally, 2021, that year was the craziest year I can ever remember in my recruitment career, which is nearly 25 years. And if I consider, the amount of inbound inquiries that we were getting from, early stage businesses that were getting $7-8 million in seed money for things like, buy now, pay later for school lunches, or, so, I mean, it was just kind of crazy, right? But BNPL on your pitch deck, you were guaranteed to get, $5 million. That then shifted towards the end of 2021 to Web3, and then everything kind of seemed to fall off a cliff. I can't help but think that you kind of, when money becomes easy, that innovation, kind of falls off the cliff. The higher the funding rounds go, mainly because you look throughout, the history of civilization, and I love to use kind of NASA as a good example. The amount of innovation that happened in that period, I don't think we've ever seen. But a lot of that was the culmination of innovations that had started in World War II. And we kind of then, after that had finished, we were able to put, those brilliant minds to perhaps better uses. Do you think that there's a case then, these kind of tough economic periods that we're facing now, the funding pressures and the fact that now you're going to have to focus on really doing something unique? Do you think that's going to see a kind of an increase in better ideas, better businesses?
Well, look, if we go back to the definition of innovation, uniqueness is actually the key word here. So that should have always been the case, which I totally agree with you. It hasn't. And when there is a lot of money out there, there is also, fragmentation. And I really feel that the space has become way more fragmented right now, and really going into in numerous cases into red ocean rather than rather than blue ocean strategies. Again, I'm going to bring back to what I said before. All these innovations need to be fully connected to the economy, and they really need to be fully connected and be responsive to the actual needs. It's not only about catering for current needs, but also catering for future needs. But if you don't solve the current needs, you can't solve the future needs of the population.
Yeah.
So I agree with you that money is still there, but I do believe, again, it's going to be way more selective. And innovation to actually happen, it has to prove itself.
Yeah. Now you touched on this about teams, and you said something that was absolute music to my ears. It's something that I've been saying to everybody in this space for the last 7 years since I launched the business. And that was that, the amount of time, energy, and effort that founders were putting into raising capital, they needed to put that into their team and their, hiring their team and particularly the founding team. My point, a kind of a sub point to that is that seeing so many businesses out there, founders out there with pitch decks, making these bold promises of what they're going to build, but they haven't got the talent to build it. And it's almost like, you can't make that promise without having the talent. You can't get the money and then go and get the talent. Like, this takes unique people to build something that you've never built before. Right? And are you seeing now there's kind of a lot more scrutiny around, founders and founding teams around, demonstrate to us where you've done this before? Absolutely.
Look, one of the first things I don't want to use the word teach, but advise my students, because I also teach in the Masters of Entrepreneurship and Innovation, a business model innovation and venture planning unit. The first thing that I say to my students is, if you don't have the right team, nothing is going to work. So, and also funders are going to be paying way more attention now to who is behind, who's going to drive this particular venture, because, driving a venture means also utilizing and being responsible for the money that you receive. Yeah. But also driving a venture means having a carefully conceptualized business model and having a very, very strong attention to financials, because, many of these ventures didn't have enough runway, but also thinking strategically and also looking into issues around governance, issues that in many cases were so invisible, but now they become really, really visible. So, and if I may also add another point, I think also funders, irrespective of VC or any kind of funding, they will start seeing ventures and assessing ventures more holistically. Elements around, for example, sustainability, ESG compliance, regulatory compliance, all these things which a couple of years ago were not even sitting on the table, they now become equal components together with, the financials, the business model itself, the revenue model, all these kind of things. So it also requires teams and skills which are more holistic, which also think out of the box, and also they bring together complementarity, which is something that in many cases I haven't seen at all.
Yeah. Really interesting that you raise that point, because if I go back to a year ago and I look at my business and the briefs that we were working on for clients, I could sense probably around about March or April, seeing that things that were happening in the US, that there was going to be some form of downturn and it was going to get tighter. Now, May last year, all of the briefs that I was working on basically got put on hold. And it wasn't until actually, that week that we were Intersect, things started to come back. Now, if I look at, the difference in that period of May to September, the brief that I had in May was go and find us somebody from Silicon Valley who's hyperscaled a business and blah, blah, blah. When it came back live in September, it was scrap that. Find us somebody who has managed a business in a high interest rate environment where credit's extremely expensive and they can run a P&L and still get growth, but keep costs down. I looked around and I was like, who's got these skills? Because for the last decade or 12 years, we've been in a super low interest rate environment. and it's been almost like a mantra of growth at all costs. And there's been very few, start to go back and, think, right, well, when did this last happen? GFC, that's then where you've got people who've come through that period. Fortunately for me, having recruited through the .com crash and the GFC, I've seen these cycles before, and then therefore can recognize, what skills and experiences are needed. Now, and as your kind of capacity is, an educator, what do you think, the education system kind of needs to be doing in order to help, develop these skills and kind of bring this through, right? One of the challenges, you and I have talked about this, Dimitrios, one of the challenges with working in fintech is a lot of the skills that you need, their behavior is not necessarily kind of teachable, courses or.
Yeah. Couple of things here, and if you allow me a comment on your very insightful ideas, I think another element, and again this is very Australian specific, is the fact that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel as a newcomer to Australia, I've been here for 6.5 years. I feel, and based on my knowledge, I feel that Australia, even though there was a global financial crisis and all these different cycles, Australia was always a very protected environment. It was always, people didn't really feel that there was crisis around there. And something that I think changed because of COVID in particular, and now with all this global pressure, to a certain extent, I feel Australians are pushed towards outside their comfort zones, which maybe also mean that they need to rethink their overall risk management practices. And probably this is something that for me, it's highly correlated to the fact that we see also a lot of pressure when it comes to fintech ventures right now. That's a comment I would like to make on that. Second thing is, I fully agree with you, and that's what's been one of the biggest challenges when we put together the Master of FinTech. And as you probably know, the Master of FinTech at Swinburne was the first postgraduate FinTech qualification in Australia. And you were actually one of the first people I met to consult during that time when I came to Australia, and I was asked to put this together and, work on that and build it, is what on earth do we actually teach?
Yeah.
For whom? And also what kind of skills? So, and if you ask me 5 years later, do I have the answer? The answer is no, because one of the key challenges with fintech is it's a space that is evolving so quickly. It's a space that is so interconnected and it's so multidisciplinary. And if you look also the people who lead successfully different fintechs to a scale up or even a unicorn, what they need definitely a very good understanding of the business they're in. They need a very good financial services background. See, for example, the people in Judo Bank or Airwallex, Upbank, or all these kind of places. But they also need to be able to be very, very open-minded when it comes to the role of technology, because fintech without technology doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Not necessarily being technically savvy, but understanding the impact, understanding the contextual peculiarities, and then, of course, understanding financials, understanding basic business model innovation and venturing aspects, regulation, which is a big thing. But at the same time, again, from a behavioral trade, being able to synthesize and being able to see beyond today and see the different trends. And I think that's something we're trying to teach our students, to actually be able to synthesize multiple disciplines and make sense out of that and connect technology with application.
Yeah. One of the reasons why I'm a big supporter of the masters that you run and any education, Dimitrios, is because of that very factor that you mentioned there. It's impossible, right? And I remember in 2004, 2005, when I first moved to Australia, I was one of the very first digital recruiters in Oz. And the challenge that I had was, because even back then, the technology was evolving so quickly, there was just never, ever enough people. And so, from that period, it really kind of, sparked in me my philosophies around hiring and talent is that, particularly in the world, the space that we operate in, if you're at the cutting edge of innovation and you're doing something that nobody's done before, there isn't a pool of talent to go to, right? Like who've done it. So what do you have to look for? You have to look for person's ability, and then you have to be able to measure it as well. Their propensity to learn quickly under pressure, right? And deliver results and all of these things, right? And over the years, when people have asked me, should I do an MBA? My first question has been, well, what do you want to get out of it? And if the view is that, you think you're going to do an MBA and, you're going to get all these job offers after it, that's kind of not the right way to do it, right? Because it's not the gateway to heaven, right? But if you're going there to learn, to develop, not only your learning, but your network and your understanding, that is absolutely, the relationships that you will get from that, the connections that you'll get from it, the insights that you'll get from it, the kind of personal growth that you'll get from it. Absolutely. You're investing in yourself.
Absolutely. Totally agree with you. And also, an additional comment is the fact that in principle, what I've also seen all these years, I'm in the fintech space since 2011, is that mostly the focus had been on the tech side and not really on what does this technology mean for the particular context. And this is, I think, where many of these fintech ventures actually failed. Because there was so much focus on the technology side of things without really understanding what does it mean from a business model and the real needs, the real pains that this particular business model will try to solve.
I read a really interesting article this morning. Amazon Prime Video have dismantled microservices architecture and gone back to monolith, and it's working way better. Right?
Interesting.
Right. AWS, right? The masters of microservices architecture, right? So I think, your case in point, I think that's a perfect example of exactly what we see, right? It's like, we get so many people, they've got to have 5 years, Golang, and you're like, all right, who's got 5 years Golang? But this is just the kind of natural, there's this knee-jerk reaction to hiring. It's not strategic. There's no planning or thought goes into it. It's basically, a lot of it is just, kind of as he said, what's the latest trend, right? And how do we kind of mimic that, and what's going to get the investor money? So if what I'm hearing from you is that there's now going to be a lot of pushback on that, I think that's great to hear. Now, you touched on, coming to Australia 6 years ago on the innovation theme, particularly if you look at the US, some of the greatest entrepreneurs, tech minds in the US are all immigrants. What do you think, is that, first of all, as an immigrant and then as an educator, and it needs to shift, and what are the big issues that we've got here that we kind of, almost like self-inflicted problems when it comes to the talent war?
Well, I must say I was, if I can use the word, I was pretty lucky because I was hired by a higher education institute such as Swinburne, who were really kind, to accept me, to sponsor my visas, because, that's a big hurdle to actually get a working visa to come to Australia. And then sponsored my permanent residency. And then I managed to also proceed quickly to become an Australian citizen and hold now a dual citizenship, Greek and Australian. To be honest, before coming here, I wasn't aware of the need to have an Australian working experience. When I came here and I started working, I quickly realized, to my surprise, that Australia, even though it has lots of immigrants as a country, is a very, very closed country without a global mindset. And that's something that really struck me with big surprise. And it's not just the global mindset, but also because of the different, states. I also felt that one state doesn't really care what the other state is doing, which is another big question mark. But my experience so far has been quite positive. And let's not forget that the higher education system here, which has also been challenged quite a lot, is it mostly depends on international students. So really catering for international students. who then come here. They also get probably a post-study visa rights for a couple of years to work and then either stay or go back to their own countries. So look, from a skills perspective, it's a very interesting one. I think as an immigrant, what I try to bring a different way of thinking. Yeah. Because I've lived and worked in 5 different countries, speaking also multiple languages and having studied also in many countries as well. So that was the first thing I brought. I brought a very different culture of thinking, which it can be appreciated, but it may also not be appreciated. But I must say, at least in my case, it linked very well with the fact that most of my students were international students. So they could link with the fact that I was an international student before or in the past. That's the first thing. The second thing is you bring that kind of different type of knowledge that is definitely needed, at least in the field where I am, in the higher education space. But I think what importantly you bring is you come to a new country to build a life. So you definitely bring that hunger, you bring that push to create, to develop and contribute. And at least in my case, that was welcomed very nicely. But I had to really fight for it. I had to prove myself. Yeah. Because also, let's not forget that I had to compete in inverted commas with people who have been born here or people who have been in the space for much longer. I mean, when I came to Australia, that was my first job in the higher education. I came from the private sector while working in Luxembourg. So it was not only just a shift to a new country, a new continent, a new way of living, but it was jumping from a complete different career shift and having to catch up and having to build also a network from zero. Yeah. I mean, if I count the coffees that I have drunk with people from the ecosystem, meeting people, getting people to become guest lecturers in my classes, there must have been thousands over the years, but that's how also you get yourself known. So the moment you arrive, if you want to survive, and I don't know if I'm using the right word, you just by default need to get out of your comfort zone immediately and get yourself out there and learn by doing simultaneously and learn, of course, make mistakes and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, look, and ironically, right, there are a lot of the qualities that are required to be successful in a startup.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you something to laugh. So last year, I was very fortunate to receive the Innovation Excellence Award by the Hellenic Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And I had lots of people coming to me and say, but how on earth did you manage to get all these awards, all this recognition and build that brand? And you're here like for 6 years. And I said, you have to get out there and show vulnerability. You have to get out there and, get yourself known. Yeah. Otherwise, if you only expect things to come to you, nothing will happen. And you have to connect with the ecosystem. Yeah. That's, I think, what basically saved me and helped me, first of all, create what I have created within the university, within Swinburne, with the masters, but not just only the masters, but the overall fintech capability. Yeah. And then also help grow that and also make that also international. Yeah. So I think for me, the constant curiosity, not only intellectual curiosity, but any kind of curiosity, it was catalytic for that kind of trajectory in my career, but also bringing that back and teaching that back to the students. I think that's also priceless as well.
Yeah. It's kind of not in the questions that I sent you, but it's a really good point and it's a very relevant one for the time that we're in. As the economy tightens, I've seen 3 times now throughout my career. If you're a consultant, you kind of got your own ABN or whatever. When times are good, it's really easy to get work. But what I find is that when the economy dries up, all those people who've been consulting for the last 3-4 years start getting in touch about permanent jobs. And what becomes really kind of apparent is that to be a successful kind of consultant or solopreneur or whatever it is that if you're not in a regular gig and you're not kind of building a business, what you have to be extremely good at is networking and selling. No matter how good you are at your job, if you're not good at the networking and kind of business development, selling yourself piece, when times get tough, you're going to find that your source of income disappears. And I think it's just a really kind of interesting point that you raised about what is required to build a profile, because people come to me and they think, I'm going to do a podcast. that doesn't build the profile, right? Like all the work that I did before a podcast, I had a blog, I did like you, thousands of coffees, went to every meetup, even though there was only 5 people there, right? And went to, going to all these things, right? Where you kind of put in those hard yards, and then through a podcast, I was able to amplify what I'd already been doing, and I was able to 10x it. But if I started with a podcast, it wouldn't have worked because I hadn't done all of that, 4 or 5 years of groundwork.
And Dexter, if I must say something on that, and I think especially under these kind of conditions, network is really important. But what is more important is who is in your network, who are your ambassadors, who actually can vouch for you, and also who are your mentors. Who are the people who will give you that advice, and who are the people that you can basically trust in terms of saying good stuff about you. That's for me what's the next level of networking.
Now, the other thing that happens as well is I think people kind of start to look at their careers and look at how they can develop during these periods. And, we've touched on the master's course, but do you want to tell us a little bit more about that and who it's aimed at?
So basically, the Master of Financial Technologies, which it has been the first of its kind program in Australia, its value proposition is the fact that it has been co-created with industry. So industry has been embedded within the curriculum development, and we have been very fortunate to be working with very highly esteemed partners, including Bendigo Bank, Judo Bank, IBM Research Australia, Banksa, Tableau, Enam. So all of these companies contribute with guest speakers, with case studies, with visits, and the whole idea here is really to be able to help our students grasp the elements of business and technology. So basically, through co-created coursework, which is at the intersection of entrepreneurship, innovation, finance, strategic technology management, data analytics, computer science, and emerging tech. This might sound like a giant, but it's really about helping students get the functional tools, the methods, the frameworks, the knowledge to understand what is the impact of technology in financial services, but also what can they do both in terms of upskilling themselves if they already work in the financial services space or they are part of the ecosystem, because it also focuses on consulting, on regulators, on policymakers. It's not just, for financial services people, but also how can they start thinking of opportunities that technology can bring. So that kind of match between business and technology, I think this is where the true value proposition of the course is. So it's both aimed at pre-experience, but also post-experience students, technical and non-technical business leaders, including also, the ones in the C-suite, as I said, policymakers, regulations, and consultants.
Brilliant. And where can people find out more about the course?
On the website of Swinburne. If they Google Master of Financial Technology Swinburne University, they will get all the information, the links at the Australian Graduate School of Entrepreneurship, and also at the Swinburne University of Technology. Or they can connect with me on LinkedIn. I can guide them accordingly.
Yeah, and how can people find you? LinkedIn?
Dr. Dimitrios Salampasis. It's the only one here in...
Put a link in the show notes.
Yeah, it's the only one here in Australia. So yes, more than happy to connect and talk to anyone. And also, I must also say, what I really like about Swinburne is not just, a technology university, but it's also a university that is embedded within a broader, entrepreneurship and innovation ecosystem. It's a AACSP accredited university. And it's part of we've got AWS Cloud Innovation Precinct, Blockchain Innovation Labs. So it's all these embeddedness that students have access to, which it's fascinating.
Awesome. Well, Dimitrios, it's been fantastic to have you on the show. I've really enjoyed this chat. It's kind of, just topics that are so, kind of ingrained in, what I believe and what I'm passionate about. And, to speak with a, expert like yourself, it's just great to be able to share this with the network.
Thank you so much for the kind invitation and for giving me the time and the space. Academics normally don't get this kind of opportunities. So I'm really grateful that you are giving this space to us as well, to get our voice heard out there.
You're welcome. And you can connect with me, folks, on LinkedIn and Twitter. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you're listening for the first time, make sure to follow us and please leave a review. And if you're coming back, thanks so much for your support. It really does mean a lot to me. Until the next episode, keep safe. FinTech Chatter is presented by Tier 1 People, leaders in FinTech executive search. We'll help you find world-class FinTech leadership talent to build world-class FinTech ventures. And you can find out more at tier1people.com.